Intsimi ka-Arthur, intsimi kabawomkhulu wam, umvangeli u-Arthur Buthi, unyana kaMbotshane Buthi, uyise kaFungile Buthi, onguye uyise ondizalayo. For nearly 30 years now, Arthur's fields have seen no harvest. A cause for a great sadness. This is a story about fields, and we have all worked the fields.
Molweni bantu basekhaya, molweni ba-Afrika mahle, molweni mzontzundu. Siyavuya ukuba nani namhlanje siniphathele into ezimnandi, kungake kungadede umnyama kuvela ukhanya. Namhlanje siqhubeka nokubabaza imbali, amandla ne-resilience yomuntu omnyama. Ewe kule dolopana le dolopana yethu eQonce, we survived i-frontier wars nezinye imfazwe. Siyaqhubeka nangoku kuphepha-phephana nezagweba zobomi. I-art kaloku, all forms of art, siquka kuzo lo mculo sithetha ngawo namhlanje, has an ability yokusomeleza nokusophula kwimililo evuthayo neqwantsulayo. Music is life, atsho makhumsha. Bantu abahle, ma-Afrika, zizwe zonke, we present to you a resilient and a beautiful voice. As a people, regardless of umbala, we have and siyaqhubeka to be united by umculo. Nantsi impilo, nantsi impiliso kule Qonce yethu. Sisuka eQonce, eTown Hall, eSouth Africa, Eastern Cape, siwuthathe umculo, siyithathe impiliso, silithathe ithemba, to straight to Town Hall of New York. Put your hands together. Ncisani mani bantu bakuthi, yiyizelani kaloku, nanku unyana wenu, nanku ungwanya, nanku umpondomise, nanku uqengeba, nalithole lo mthwakazi. Majola, ngena sikulindile, yiza nentsimbi ka-Arthur. Nkosi, ezandleni.
Send us out of my way. Is that next breath indeed a miracle? Is it a miracle? Oh, 'cause I've been praying and I've been fasting, been going all along walls. Oh yet I'm still stalking in this wilderness, trying to lift my mind up. I need an answer, Lord. I need your love, dear God. I need an answer, God. My entire family's lost faith in me, they've lost faith in my dream. Oh, is this dream so far from being real, so far from being real? Two stones at my feet, I kicked one into space and turned one into a moment of weakness can't erase the chances if love has failed you. I need my faith to see
The workers, in a rush, always in a rush, rushing down the street. The workers, the first gods of every field there ever was. The morning rush, the rush to the factory. Intsimi efumbethe amangcwaba.
Sizibandini uzalani nina
Imizimba, imimoya, yegazi lam, yoyele apha. Imizimba, imimoya, yegazi lam, yoyele apha. Imizimba, imimoya, yegazi lam, yoyele apha.
Zwelitsha le yilokishi eme kumhlaba kaZwelitsha Township.
In Zwelitsha's family, business is tradition. Hard work, discipline, and ownership are passed down. I sat to hear the voice of a woman dreaming of dressing a nation.
Ndime phezu komlambo wengcwaba ndiyaphephuka. Ndigrumbela iintsana zam ikamva ngenzipho. Ndijijisana nenyolunyolu lele ngonyama engenalusini. Irhenyanga ezinyoli ibe linye kube bubutyityaba ligazi. Ndixhathise ngethembe linguYesu elombelwe kumangcwaba anamagama abaphambukeli. Ndixwaye izijunqu zam laphambatshileyo ndizama ukuvuselela izidumbu zethemba ndizibhinqileyo. Ndiqhwithana ngeengququ zesonka esingundileyo noodade bethu. Ukuze lakutshona ilanga ndiqumbe inyala ndikhohlisa inzala yesibeleko sam. Ndibathembise ngengomso elanqunquthwa kudala zimpethu zesilonda zingcinezelo. Ndiyathunakala, ndicinezelwe ngamavili exesha.
Nobuzwe's reality was an impossible dream for my grandmother, Unobansi, a hawker, Unomarike, who sold dresses at a bus rank. Dresses made from cloths Nobuzwe is producing today. The sun is setting and the workers walk back home. My grandmother's makaba bag would appear from the corner, balanced on her head. I retire to her house. Her house is my childhood home, the field where I first planted dreams of global success. My grandmother rose at dawn to read the daily newspaper. She would then get to work after reading, discussing, debating, headlines, cutting patterns, ironing dresses, eating while standing, measuring cloth, focused, disciplined, hardworking. Through rain, through hail, through heat, she got on the taxi to the bus rank. My grandmother worked. I woke up from a dream. In the dream, I was inside a slave cabin. The Mississippi Delta led me to the plantation I had seen in my dream.
When the ship set sail from the mother shores, screams are heard from the forest, shakas out in the water. So when the flitter rides on those foreign shores, languages got broken, lineages got destroyed.
Izwe liyintsimi. Owethu umsebenzi kuwuchumisa. Hayi usizo lungaka. Hayi indlala engaka. Daromkhulu amasimi ajikiwe ze enziwa amaqonga okulwa amadabi. Ntomkhulu ndibizwe nguwe ngethongo. Ndivulele indlela ndibuyele ekhayeni. Ze ndibe nako ukuphilisa njengomphilisi ophilileyo. Ze kudede bumnyama kuvele ukukhanya. Ze kubuye kuvunwe isivuno sogcobo kwintsimi kabawo omkhulu. Intsimi ka-Arthur.
Welcome to the Town Hall. You just watched Arthur's Field, an EP and video by artist Majola Ganymede. We are also joined today by Dr. Murray Nossel, storyteller, educator, and entrepreneur, and Olivier Award-winning actress Noma Dumezweni. Thank you all for joining us today in a conversation about this incredible work that we all just saw. Majola is dialing in from South Africa, and we were with him earlier, but now we are joined by this beautiful abstract painting meant to represent him because we are dealing with Wi-Fi issues. But, you know, God always provides, and now we have something very interesting to look at. So thank you, Majola, for joining us. We're so excited to speak to you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Yes.
Well, Majola, I want to start with you. What was the genesis of this project? I understand that it came together after a journey of yours. Can you tell us about that journey?
So in 2017, I woke up from a dream. I was living in a farm in the Eastern Free State, close to the border of Lesotho and South Africa. And I woke up from a dream, and in a dream I was in a slave cabin. I was inside the cabin, looking out the cabin, and on the porch of the cabin, there was a very, very old and beautiful and gray-haired woman who was looking at a full moon that was just outside the cabin. That was the only vision I saw. And then I woke up. And then I started having conversations with my friends about the dream. And it so happened that around that time, there was someone who had traveled to the farm from the US, Professor Scott Fee. And he said, you know, I was welcome to come to his house with his family whenever I'm ready to go follow the dream, because the people I spoke with really centered the dream in the space or in a site of enslavement or slavery. And the biggest story or the biggest narrative around slavery happens to be coming from America, United States of America, involving African Americans. And so I thought that I should follow that journey and end up in that cabin I saw that old woman in. And I did. I traveled to America in 2018. I arrived in America 4th, July 4th. And I stayed until the 1st of January 2019. That's how long the journey lasted in North America.
And what exactly was the route of the journey? Because I know that you went through several states.
I wanted to start at the headwaters of the Mississippi. Or I wanted to start at the state where the source of the Mississippi comes from. And the reason why I accepted the Fee family's help or hand of welcome to their home was because I knew that the headwaters, and Scott explained to me that the headwaters are in Minnesota, Minneapolis. And I stayed there for a while, and then I traveled down to Tennessee. And the Tale of Tall Ships, in fact, was workshopped in Franklin, Tennessee, while I was traveling down to Louisiana. And then I traveled to Alabama, because in Alabama there was an Africa town that was established by the last group of slaves or known slaves who came with the cargo, the last known slave cargo from Africa. And one of the people who was there, Cujo Lewis, and his story was captured by the late and great Zora Neale Hurston.
Yeah.
And somebody gave me a book, Barakun. And after reading that book, I got on a bus, I got on a train, and then got on a bus in Tennessee, and then ended up in Alabama, Mobile, Alabama. And I stayed there, and I went to the gravesite of all the last, walked there for half a day, walking around their graves, and then went to the church they built with their hands when they gained freedom to worship there. And then I traveled on to Louisiana. That was the last stop. So this was happening over a period of months. So I'll go back to Minnesota and then go back and down south and travel back up with the help of the Fee family. And Louisiana has to be the most poignant one because, it ties the story of slavery to the land itself. And I went to the site where people worked from sunrise to sundown. So I don't know if I answered your question well. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Malay?
Yeah.
Sorry. Hello, Majola. I listened to that story because that's interesting because of the introduction was of the Fee family and therefore that route. So in my history, and I'm a British South African heritage person now living in the States, and I find it extraordinary because that absolute clarity of knowing that I am not an African American, and you being a South African doing the enslaved route. Did you feel, because I love the way that you speak and feel, and just before this moment you just felt Spirit saying you just need to do a prayer. Did you feel Spirit with you along that journey?
Noma, Spirit was with me through and through. Okay, it was with me through. I had to trust in Spirit because that was the source of the journey. They had the map. They had the itinerary. They are the ones who brought Scott to me. And they are the one who brought the Fee family to me. And it was interesting to be in that family because they are a white American family. And they had invited a young African healer to come be with them. But of course, you know, if you are in that setting, you know, Spirit shows you the work you are supposed to do through the person who's helping you. The person becomes a mirror, you know. And it was interesting for me to be part of that family and to be, honestly, to be that intimate with a white family for such a long time was a first experience for me. And it's still something I'm unpacking, you know, all what that setting and that relationship was like. But Spirit has no color. I know from that experience, you know, Spirit has no color. And I was confronted, and I hope they too were confronted with difficult things of what it means to be in one house and be biracial or interracial, and know that the mission for this, you know, co-dwelling is a spiritual one, whether we understand it ourselves now or we don't, because we can be part of a moment and not get the full reason why we are part of a moment. And it may click maybe after 5 years and after 10 years. And but I did feel Spirit through and through, throughout that journey. And I had to obey and I had to surrender. And whenever I got in the way, things would stop, things wouldn't move, there would be no one willing to help. And whenever I would do the work I need to do to go to the river, the Mississippi, the host, the true host of the journey was the Mississippi waters. And whenever I would go to the Mississippi waters, there was a friend of mine there, Corey Parkos, captain, who has a boat on the Mississippi. And I went there to sleep in his boat over a couple of nights. So the spirit of the river, really, I felt that I had honored the Spirit that had invited me by being in such a setting. So yes, the Spirit I felt, and I still feel now.
Thank you.
Majola, while you were in the US, you started to write some of the songs that are featured in this EP. Can you tell us about that process? What sparked some of these songs? What did you see? What did you touch? What did you feel that started you off with either the lyrics or the melodies?
So when I was in the farm in the Eastern Free State, the farm belonged to, he no longer owns the farm, belonged to Mr. J. Naidu. Mr. J. Naidu is a very interesting presence in the history of South African struggle. He was a champion of the workers during apartheid South Africa. And he owned the farm and I went to live there. And of course, I was hearing the stories of what he did, you know, of his contribution and what it meant for him to serve the first black president, the former president, Nelson Mandela. But when I was in his farm, I got acquainted to an instrument that belonged to his sister, his late sister, Dimes Naidu, an Indian accordion. And I asked for permission to start doing my scales on a daily basis on that Indian accordion. And I'm telling you, Mile, the day I put my hands on that Indian accordion, there was just something that pulled me in. All the sounds of the songs came through that Indian accordion. You know, I had to obey the sound of the Indian accordion first and learn how to use my voice together with that instrument, or Indian harmonium, so Noma asked a question about spirit. I do believe that all these songs came to me in such a nuanced way because I obeyed the sound of that Indian harmonium. And so I traveled with it to North America, and I traveled with it down the route. And when I was workshopping the song, The Tale of Tall Ships, with another Fee, Steve Fee, that is the sound we had to work around. And I hear that Steve was a fan of, all African sounds and films. And that's why, we took the Disney route as a foundation. And when once we got back here, Tsepang, who is a rocker, one of the very first Black rock groups in South Africa, he took it to the township, the rock sound. He grounded the sound of Tale of Tall Ships and Impepo. He put in Impepo, to the sound so that it rises. Yes, so that was the inspiration behind the sound of the songs and the journey towards the songs we have now.
Can I add that I had to ask my mum as to remind me, because impepo is the herb that you burn at the beginning in the room when you're. That is the herb that you burn at the beginning, isn't it?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, so it's just opening up that energy. So I learned that from my mum, and I thought, remind me, what's the name of that herb? So it's just so lovely hearing you say it. Impepo. Yes, because I learned that late. I learned that late.
Well, we're here today, and the collaboration between the Town Hall and Majola in this presentation came to us by way of Murray. Murray, can you just talk to us about your starts with Majola, with the World Mother Story song, and then, of course, with this project?
Yes, I would love to. I'm so happy to be part of this conversation. Yes, well, I founded a movement called the World Mother Storytelling Project, based on a personal experience that I had. I'm also South African. And in 2006, my parents were carjacked in South Africa and held hostage for a number of hours. And it was due to my mother's ability to connect with the carjackers that they didn't harm her or my father. And my mother was able to rescue both of them from the situation. And in the wake of that carjacking, just realizing the magnificence of what my mother had done in that car, of connecting with people who had captured her, and in fact apologizing to them for what apartheid had done to result in the situation that they were in. I realized, wow, I don't really know my mother. I know her as a mother, but I don't know her as a person who could really rise to the occasion in that kind of way. And it was based on that I really felt that if everyone in the world really knew their mother's story, we would live in a changed world. And so based on the work that I've been doing in listening and storytelling over many, many years, I founded this movement really to teach people from childhood all the way through to late adulthood how to listen to and be able to tell the stories of their mothers, and have been absolutely delighted that Town Hall, embraced this project and gave us a venue to have live events where mothers would actually tell their stories and children would listen to their mother's stories. So I was looking for an anthem for the World Mother Storytelling Project. And I spoke to my friend Philip Miller, who's a wonderful composer, in South Africa, and I said, Philip, help me find an anthem, for World Mother Storytelling Project. Surely, I mean, there must be so many songs about mothers that we can use. And Philip just couldn't come up with an answer, and he couldn't tell me anything. And about a year later, he writes me an email and said, Murray, I found you your song. I've found the anthem. It's written by this South African man, Majola Ganymede. He is an incredible composer. He is a performer. He is a fellow queer man. Well, this was like this couldn't get any better than that. And so it was very hard for me to find Majola at that point, because Majola, if I'm not mistaken, you were actually involved in a very long ritual where you had to be sort of removed from, sort of the mainstream of society, and you were out in the wilderness. So it was very hard for me to get hold of Majola. And finally, I did get hold of Majola, and having heard the song, it was just very, very clear to me that this was the World Mother song. And really, this is how Majola and I became friends, I would say. And Majola, I think you know this because I've said this to you many times, that I have a tremendous, tremendous amount of faith in the spirits that guide Majola. So every time something has arisen in our connection with one another, I find myself listening out for the spirits, and really trusting that they're guiding Majola and me in terms of involving him with World Mother.
Well, Murray, you also have brought Noma to us. And no, it's just it's a whole.
I'm just smiling like this because I'm like, this is great. I love this. Yeah.
Noma, you showed the presentation to your mother.
Yes, I did. I was very cheeky, Majola, if you don't mind. So I caught up with it yesterday, and because the email I sent you was, I have so many feelings watching this right now, and I am a refugee child. My mother had to leave South Africa with my father because of apartheid, and via various travels from the age of 0 to 7, we finally ended up, me, my mother, and my sister, in England. But those stories of her childhood, they were just little bits because she was surviving. She was a single mum trying to figure out how she was going to look after us two in this new country, an absolutely new environment, and new... The weather was different. Do you know what I mean? Even as simple as the weather was different, we had to wear coats more often than not growing up in England. So that sense of her storytelling, and then me watching and listening to to Artist Fields, I was like, oh shit, I can't keep this to myself. Excuse me, I swore.
It's fine.
Oh, dang, I can't keep this to myself. I Noma Wushe, need to feel what my mother's feelings are about this as well, because I know absolutely it will resonate, because what her story is that, now this Murray knows this bit, but my mum self-published wrote a book, and it's about a story, a letter to her mother, forgiving apartheid. And it was a sense of her history, remembering her grandfather having to give up his orchard fields. And exactly, so I'm watching the visuals of yours, and it's that same thing. There was, I'm going to have to read a little bit of what my mum said, if you do not mind. But it was just that sense of absolute acknowledgement, she knowing exactly what you were speaking about, because she said, that's my story. That is absolutely my story. Forgive me just a second. Here we go. Can I read this bit? Are you all right? When Majola said something to the effect that artist fields have not been used for a while, I remembered the forcing of people during the rehabilitation schemes that destroyed our lives to cut down on the fields they owned, cut down on livestock, use instead the fields that had been used for growing crops as grazing land, creating vast grazing fields with less livestock. The vast grazing fields where previously the fields had created stability, plenty of food, self-sufficiency for people who were well off and didn't want for anything as they supported one another. With less livestock, people were unable to work whatever little land was left because they used cattle for ploughing the fields. The rehabilitation schemes deliberately forced people into poverty, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. That's when I experienced separation from my mama. When Majola talks of his grandmother working hard, that is the story of all our mothers and grandmothers, all Black women in South Africa. He is very creative. I liked his skirt and imaginative, funny, I thought. A great one-man show, I thought, in vast open spaces. Thank you for sharing, my darling. That was for me. But the resonances are all there. Everything you're saying, because I know of these stories, but to see them in a young man telling it from his perspective, it's a bigger story. And that's this is what we're all trying to connect with. And this beautiful meeting for me with Murray a couple of weeks ago has led to this moment. So I am learning more and more that there are no mistakes.
Yes. Yes.
And when we watch other people's works or other people telling their stories or their mother's stories, their family stories, their nation stories, it reminds us often of what we have forgotten to ask about or what we have forgotten. And so, Noma, I was thinking of you trying to figure out what the herb is.
Yes.
And reaching out to find out.
Absolutely, and that's when it started. Like, Mama, what was that herb you used to burn? And I'm like, all right, let me have a look at this video, and then that's what came up. Because my mother hadn't seen, because she fled apartheid. She fled apartheid in '69, the year I was born, or '68, and I was born in '69. And then she doesn't see her mother for 25 years. And then when she comes back from that experience, she brings back a herb. I'm like, what's going on, Mother? What's going on? Because then she starts burning it in the house. She said it's for the spirits. I'm like, okay, right. You've never mentioned this before. We've got to start talking about this. But it was, do you know what I mean? Because I realized, especially with exile and movement and itinerant movement, you hold on to what you can inside. It's very hard to share it outside. And that's the story of the immigrant and the refugee. How do you hold those stories? And so for her to be able to go back, and that, I mean, I'm just talking about one tiny moment. Unfortunately, in that time, her father had passed. So that was her great heartbreak. I do remember that happening when she had heard the news that he'd passed away. But her gratitude to being able to see her mother, because those 25 years were coupled with guilt that she had to leave and literally do a midnight flit with her husband. And then on the way, me and my sister were born. So the Impepo, I've always remembered that. So as soon as I saw it, I went, oh yes, that's it. So when I first came to South Africa in 2004 in Goodlintaba, Umzimkhulu district. Is it the other way around? I can't remember. Anyway, forgive me, I'm so very bad. I don't speak any of my ancestral languages, but that's another conversation. You hold on to those little moments going, oh, that's who my mother is, and therefore starting to understand what my ancestry is the fascinating thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you to your mother for those words, because, as Mari said it ends up being an offering to the feminine energy of my grandmother. And for your mother to do such a thing of giving words to this is not a small thing for me. It comes from a motherly, intuitive space to give a word before you sit or you leave, or when you are welcomed. There are words that mothers or fathers have to say. So for me right now, I feel really welcomed because in the space you guys are coming from, which, New York, because an elder has given me and us those words. So I'm grateful for that. But also when you were speaking about returning, your mother returning, I thought about the late and great Miriam Makeba, who also was in exile for about 30 years.
Yeah.
And there's a documentary that really changed me. When she came back to South Africa after apartheid had ended, there was this documentary that was taking her to her ancestral lands where some of her ancestors are buried. She couldn't see her mother, and her mother died while she was in exile. And so they walked down a street, a suburban street with mansions. And this relative of hers is saying they were buried under these houses. So the story of land and fields and gold and the death of people, if the earth could speak in a language we understand, I don't think we would like what it would say.
Hey.
But of course, the earth is already speaking. It's just that we don't want to hear what the earth. So think of that experience of being away for 25 years and coming back, and they say somebody lives on top of your ancestral lineage or history, and everything that you are supposed to be is buried under that foundation, that mountain. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, physical and spiritual.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have to say, looking at everyone on the screen, including Majola's multiple stripes, I realize suddenly looking at the screen, I'm the elephant in the room. It's very unusual, actually. I'm the white elephant in the room. And I'm an African, and it's really interesting what you were just saying, Majola, because, my grandparents and great-grandparents came to South Africa in search of gold. In fact, I have a certificate of my great-grandfather, my grandfather. I've got the certificate which actually declares that there's a certain plot of land on which he can mine for gold, and the receipt of all the things that he bought for mining, the shovel and the rope for cordoning off his area and that kind of thing. So that's what brought my, Jewish family from Eastern Europe to South Africa. And my grandfather had a store. It was called a kaffa etnik. Now, there's no more derogatory word in South Africa than the word kaffa. I mean, isn't that so, Majola? I mean, what does this mean?
Oh, no. I'm not defining that word. Yeah, it's
the N word. It's the N word.
It's the N word.
Yeah.
And why it was called a kaffa etnik was that Russian and Eastern European Jews who were uneducated had no other employment apart from setting up these concession stores on the mines. And so the word kaffa etnik was actually a derogatory word that was used towards the people who worked in these concession stores, like my grandfather.
Wow.
So he was the lowest of the low. And in fact, it was written in the Daily Mail of the time that any white person who spends their day working with kaffas is no better than a kaffa themselves. And this was referring to the sort of class of person that my grandfather was. Now, I remember going with my dad to pick my grandpa up from his store on Saturday afternoons. And we would drive through the industrial center of Johannesburg to the outskirts, which is where the gold mines were. And this is where my grandpa had established his place in 1911. And above the entrance to the place was a sign that actually said native shop. That's what my grandparents called black South Africans. They were natives. It was like a big airplane hangar, just corrugated iron. And I would walk inside and there would be these long stainless steel tables and all these mine workers would be bent over these tables and eating the offal stew that my grandfather and these people were making in the back of the concession store. And my grandpa was the butcher, and he had all these animals, these cow carcasses hanging there, and he chopped up the meat, and that's what would be turned into this stew. And then there was a candy section and a tobacco section. And I just remember going there to pick my dad up my grandpa up with my father on a Saturday. And I just ran into that place, held my nose because of the smell of the offal, and ran out again as quickly as I could, because there was something about all these black mine workers and the smell of the offal and all that, these languages that I couldn't understand. And it was embarrassing. I sort of felt like I was branded with this, this grandfather who was this, this really, people were derisive towards such people who worked all day with the tappers, so to speak. But what this gave me was an incredible regret, tremendous feeling of regret when I got older, that I didn't realize what a treasure trove this was, and how my grandfather was so much more a man who was intimately connected to South Africa than I was. He spoke all the languages. Like Noma, I don't speak the languages. Apartheid didn't want me to speak those languages. So Majola, meeting you has been, an extraordinary thing, because it's been a reconnection with something that I left. I came to live here in this States. And I feel through you that I'm able to reconnect to where I was born. It's my land. And, it comes with a lot of freight being a white man from South Africa, but that's what I am. So my question to you, Majola, is, what about me and working with me? What is that like for you? Again, a white man from South Africa. Now you found out that my ancestors were part of those people who came to plunder the country for its wealth. How does that land?
So it's so interesting. First, you spoke about papers, documents which validate, the quest for gold. He was a documented worker, although he was arriving from somewhere else. And the people who have always been there were undocumented, not only to as workers, but as human beings. Mm-hmm. This is the depth of the pain of apartheid, is that someone had to be subhuman for someone to be human. Mm. So your grandfather, yes, he spoke all the languages, but what was his communication, with the use of all the languages? Yes, he cooked and fed, but where did we get the cows? You understand? Because there's also a story connected, especially with the space we chose here, the Gola Town Hall. Right, that hall was built in the center, in the middle of all the frontier wars that were happening down here in the Eastern Cape. There were a series of 9 wars that the Xhosa people, fiercely fought. This is the stories we don't hear. To keep their humanity, their land, their culture, their cattle, because that was their bank, the cattle. And in the middle of that, you get towns like King Williamstown coming up, you get Kimberley, where the diamonds are mined, you get Johannesburg. So you get a movement of people, men like your grandfather, who had to leave their families behind in a space like Eastern Cape and go to the mine and be mistreated there. And then you come back to a disconnected family, right? So for me, the biggest work is the work of disconnecting not to space, but to the truth. So there was a lie that white people had to believe to maintain apartheid. And there was a lie they had to pass down to their children, and their children had to believe that lie. You know? So there's a disconnection with the truth. You know, the truth of how apartheid was born and colonization was born. There's a misrepresentation of that truth because we are not ready. White people, most white people, not all white people, but most white people I engage with are not ready to get down to the DNA of the lie. You know, that you are better than all human beings. All human beings on earth? Really? So what does one have to do in your case when you detach yourself from the space and go build a life in a different space where there is a melting pot of different cultures? What does that teach you about your humanity when you come from a space that was so divided as South Africa? And then when you get to that space where it's easy to access different people, different cultures, different languages, what does that, you know, do inside you? What hard truth do you have to tell yourself about how your humanity was built?
Yeah, it's Toni Morrison's line, isn't it? What are you without the racism? Because I love this. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Majola. And I'm looking at these two men speaking about this, and I the world is showing us all this at the moment, and I don't know if this ties in or not, but just that sense of this is what America is dealing with right at this moment. And I always kind of go, I find it interesting with South Africa. It was not perfect, but the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was something that marked something in South Africa as an acknowledgement, because these things were written into Constitution that Black people were non-existent. They didn't matter. We didn't matter. And I find that interesting. But the use of that, what you say about what your grandfather's language could have been, Murray, because that's what oppression does. Whoever's above you or whoever's below you, how you speak to them. So the use of that language, you may have known all those languages. What's interesting, what I'm hearing is Majola say, but how was that language spoken to those Black people? And that's what we're all dealing with at the moment, how the semantics of language. What do I want to hear? What do you want to hear? What do I want to say? How can I say it? And that's why I suppose this piece of storytelling with Arthur Phil's going into the history of South Africa, but then what I'm hearing is the emotional and spiritual history of all peoples. Is that any piece of art, if it does the work it does, it will resonate all the way around the world. And I think that's why I felt so full watching yours, because I had to send it to my mother. Yes, I was asking about Mpepo, but actually I needed to see what her reaction is, because she is the elder, she is a different generation, closer to our grandparents and great-grandparents. But we have to, even just by asking that question, Murray, I think that's where the conversations happens. And that's where you can go, and you sit in that space very well, because you know already you're an outsider. I think even just by being a queer man, you're already an outsider. Do you know what I mean? Yes. It's like we've all got our demographics. Like two
and I'm
women,
also
two
an
Black
outsider.
women. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We've all got our different things in the world. So that's why who is... It comes down to money, it comes down to gold, it comes down to property, it comes down to things, the materialism of things. And as you said earlier on, Mother Earth is going, what the beep are you doing to me right now? And we have to sit, but people are afeared because we're not connecting in the way we could be, but I think we're better than we have been. I always have hope in humanity, but we have to go through the hard things. We have to go through the painful things. And this conversation is a beautiful hard thing. Even sitting here listening to you ask that question and listening to Majola's answer, I was like, "Ooh, okay."
You know, it's interesting. It's so interesting, everything you've just said. And what you said about the hard place or the hard space. You know, Millet and I were talking about lineages and healing lineages. And that's the work I've been doing. And I do feel, though, that, you know, white families all over the world have a task of going in the lineage, you know, like the story you shared, Mari, is so important for my lineage as well, because you talked about the document of him having a right to dig in the land and take something from the land. While that was happening, I have a certificate from Queen Victoria evicting my grandfather from his fields, and then also giving him a new title deed with the crown at the top. So stating that, yes, your name is on this title deed, but you know that this belongs to the crown. You know? You know that this belongs to the crown. And so that is also a language, right? That is also a language of disconnection. So what I'm calling for in Arthur's fields is, how do we find a language of connection in our so disconnected families, all of us, black and white?
Arthur's Field is a history lesson, is a history story, it's a history telling. And therefore, that's why my mother can resonate with it. And I come from a different part of that lineage because my mother had to leave her country, and then we ended up in a country called England. So I learn in a different way. But you come back, one will always have to come back to who you are in the space of what we are.
It's so beautifully spoken, Noma. You know, the what you're talking about when you talk about learning. For me, what's been involved with that, and maybe that's the case for most people. I mean, true learning. We're talking about true learning, right? We're talking about visceral, embodied learning. And what it means is facing feelings that are incredibly uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable, absolutely.
Loss, you know, that for me, you know, I've never been able to truly remove myself from South Africa, because I think that there's something about those encounters in my grandpa's shop. But never mind my grandpa's shop, in my backyard where the servants lived. You know, the women who raised me, I mean, this was never far away. You can pretend it was far away, but it was never far away. And so there's all of this that was going on. And as Majola, you so rightly said, we were just being fed a pack of lies all the time about what our lives were. So the learning involves resurrecting the past in a way and seeing how much of it was actually a total delusion. I mean, we were living in a delusional space. And then to sort of face the truth, face what was, is painful. But then for me, what happens next is the sheer joy of it. The joy of reconnection, the joy of owning the lineage. The joy of learning something brand new, Majola. I mean, I've got those documents. They sit in my house, which is 8 miles away from here. I've never thought about those the true meaning of those documents that you just revealed. Like what it meant. That my grandfather was actually officially given that plot of land. And then at the same time, and I have to bring this image in now, because it ties up, Majola, so deeply with your with the land as mother, with the land as with the land as nurturer. Outside my grandpa's concession store was a mine shaft. Okay, and that mine shaft sent mine workers 4,000 feet under the ground to pick up the gold. And there were special ventilation systems that were sent down there because those people couldn't breathe. And if there were water floods, those people would drown. So there was no guarantee that people who went down into the ground to find the gold from that land that was their own land, bring that gold back again, they were also risking their lives. And these are the same undocumented, disenfranchised people. And there was also something for me about these people going under the ground, never mind not being recognized or seen or having identities, sort of become visible, but that they were actually under the earth.
With Arthur's Fields, there's also, does this make sense, Majola? There's also a weird, beautiful Afrofuturism to it, I hear in the sounds, or is that just me?
So the producer, production is Tshepang, Stiffy, Tshepang Ramoba, Stiffy, and Joseph Williams, who is actually originally from Chicago, Illinois, and which was an interesting combination, right? Because I had just come back from this trip, to get messages from spirits. And then I'm coming back, and it's not really about slavery, but it's really about themes of what it means to struggle. Between my ideas and my sound and his search for his identity and his spiritual identity here in South Africa and Africa, I think there was a space we managed to channel in terms of sound. I mean, it just kept growing. It just kept growing, and it sits in different spaces. It sits in funk. It sits in baqanga. It sits in Afro. It sits in R&B soul. It sits in jazz. It sits in choral. It really sits in everything that we have all tried to imagine. But there was something interesting you said about the land and stepping on the land and having access to touch and feel and dance and do all these things on the land. And for me, when we talk about capitalism, the fear there is that we will have to replace capitalism with the word that matters, which is custodianship, which is the passing down of taking care of a piece of land. Now imagine if my grandfather's story had unfolded differently. I wouldn't have created Arthur's Fields, because this is a plea, this is a prayer that me and my cousins, the generation that is now again interested in working the land, the generation that they said wouldn't be interested in freedom and working the land, we are coming back and we're teaching tech, we're teaching these high fancy lives, and we're going back to the villages, and we are dreaming and we are fighting with our families to have access to go back and work the land. Now, imagine this, what you just painted, Mile, that the Queen of England had to give a piece of paper to a man that, yes, this is your home. I'm sending you this piece of paper as an outsider, as a foreigner, to validate that, yes, that's your land. You can work that land as long as you prepared to pay this amount of tax to the crown. You understand? So now we know that story. We know that racialized, that capitalist story. We know that. But now, for us who are back in the ancestral land, we are facing a new struggle, because now there's patriarchal uncles who fight you for being young. You're fighting me for being younger than you, first of all. Second of all, you're fighting me for having energy, which you no longer have. So there's envy, jealousy. And third of all, you're fighting me for my sexual identity. These things have nothing to do with the work that we have to do on the land. So we also, inside our families, strip each other, and we make each other we strip each other of decency and disrespect, and we don't give each other license and permission to do things that heal and connect and bring the family together. So the work of healing the lineage has been really difficult and painful for me, because I have to answer some of the most unanswered, the most necessary questions that I need answers to. They go unanswered, because the truth is, I have to admit that even elders lie, as we have seen that
Of course.
white elders can lie to their children about racism and how the world is shaped. There's also other forms of lies that we have to work through. I know lie is a very strong word when you use it in a sentence of elder. When you use the word elder and lie, you just don't see that. But unfortunately, we live in a world where that has been so debased that, you know, you have to be prepared when you're doing the healing work to meet all sorts of resistance, whether it's race, whether it's resources, whether it's sex, whether it's all these things, all these isms, they can be a cog in one's wheel of trying to fight for progress. And this is why I think it's important what you said and what you shared about what your mother said, that people helped each other in that economy, you know, of custodianship, of taking care of the land until your turn to take care of the land is done, and you pass it to those who come after you, together with stories, together with heroes and heroes of your time, together with what worked and what didn't work for the land, because there's herbs for the land to heal the land. They knew these herbs. They knew this. They knew everything they needed, like your mother said, to live and support each other. And the real economy was support and custodianship.
Yes, yes.
What other tools can we give to children from 5, you know, to say,
Yes,
we don't want this world anymore? So in order for this world to change, we need to teach the children. But of course, children come as teachers, because children are always teaching us to listen, to pay attention, to stop, and
be in
look
the
at
present.
what they just created,
Be in the
to
present.
look at what they just learned today. They want to go to the pool and show you the dive in, because it's immediate. It's so important to them. It's what they mastered today, you know, and you must share in the joy of what they mastered. And I think that is, if we can adapt to that, to say, you know, when we're having conversations, we shouldn't explain apartheid all over again. When we're having conversations about apartheid, we should say, how many white families have physically done the work of healing their pain and contributing to the healing of others? It's person per person, or person by person, family by family, street by street, township by township, country by country.
Yeah, the ripple
It has
effect.
to go back to
Absolutely.
the root. And this is the importance of the fields, that in the fields you plant something, and for many weeks you don't see anything. You don't, but you keep the faith that something underneath there has life. You
Faith,
know?
not fear. Faith, not fear.
What
Absolutely.
we are doing, all the work we are doing, as the 4 of us in this conversation, and the work we're doing outside of this conversation, is part of that seed planting, you know? And we have to plant with faith that it will be left there, and then it will grow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just overjoyed by this conversation and just the light all of you have brought to it. there's a gospel song from the US called We've Come This Far by Faith, leaning on the Lord. And Majola, that's about your work. And it's about this specific work that you've created through so much difficulty and so much churning and so much vulnerability. So I thank you, Majola, for
Thank
sharing
you.
yourself with us.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for
Beautiful
the time.
work.
It was
Yeah.
really a beautiful hour and a half, and I
Go
think
back quickly.
we're going to take the conversation into our private spaces now,
Yes.
because the conversation has to continue.
Yes, and thank you so much, Noma and Murray, for
such a privilege.
joining us. And Noma, I'm a fan, so I'm when Murray told me, I was like, from the unviewing.
I'm a fan right now. This is where the real work is. This is fantastic.
And
Such a
Murray, for
privilege.
being just a part of the Town Hall family, for the work that you've been doing with the World Mother Storytelling Project. I mean, just incredible. And for bringing this piece to us, for bringing Majola to us, for bringing Noma to
Yes.
us.
Thank you,
And
Murray.
we've got an incredible future ahead of us. So I feel sparkly after this conversation. I give thanks to all of you.
Yes.
Love you.
May I mention one dream, Melee?
Yes.
Talking of the future, Nova, you were talking about, was it African futurism in terms of the music? What did you?
Yeah. It was just a sense. It's like the Bootsy Collins Sun Ra. There's just something kind of alien, otherworldly, yet it's rooted so much in the earth. That's how I understand. That's how I understand Afrofuturism. That the scope is far and long and magical and creative, and it's always been in terms of music. But there's those sounds, there's those frequencies that are yearning and calling. Do you know what I mean?
My
Sound,
goodness.
voices do it. That's what I was hearing, sir.
Yes. Well, as a storyteller, I believe at the end of a story, and a hopeful story like this, the end should not be right now. The end should be in the future, right?
Yes.
So the ending hasn't happened yet.
Lovely.
So when I met Noma in Central Park just a week ago, was it 2 weeks, Noma?
Yeah.
I said to Noma, well, Noma, would you like to be involved with the World Mother Storytelling Project? And Noma said to me, yes, just tell me what I have to do and I'll show up. No, that's what you said. I have to verify. That's absolutely true. That's what Noma said to me. And she said, but you can rest assured I'll be standing on the stage with you next year at Town Hall. And so I'd like to write that future right now, that Noma will be on the stage next to me next year at Town Hall live, and that standing beside us will be Majola Ganymede, and that we will hear Arthur's Fields live from
Lord.
on the stage of Town Hall. I'd like to write that future right now.
Malay, good
It's
for you.
written.
We'll be there.
It's written
Let's do
in the
it.
stars.
Let's figure it out.
Let's do it. Yes, yes, yes.
Beautiful, Murray.
Yes.
Lovely.
Thank you, Murray. Well, we're going to close out right now. Thank you all so much for taking this time today. And thank you, Majola, for your beautiful work.
We give thanks.
Goodbye, everyone.
We give thanks. We give thanks.
Blessings all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.